Hi, Dr. Patong.
Hi.
How are you?
Good.
Yeah, so Tolly is here, and then Dr. Gu is also joining us this evening. Hi, Dr. Gu.
Hello, Dr. Python, how are you?
Good. Long time no talk.
Long time no see. Dr. Sheng, how are you?
Good, Heidi.
Good.
Let's see. I try to see the face. I cannot see.
Yeah, here he is. So maybe let's just get started, and then while maybe other colleagues and then are joining in. So my name is Bill Zhen, and I'm a professor at the University of Regina. And together with my great colleagues, and then Dr. Malcolm Wilson, and then Dr. Paitong at the University of Regina, and then my colleagues, Dr. Zhenhua Zui at the Chinese University of Petroleum, Beijing. And then together we are presenting this CCUS special seminar series. And today is our talk 7, CO2 EOR and related issues. And then we were very honored to have Dr. James Sheng to deliver this talk. Dr. James Sheng is a professor from Texas Tech University and a distinguished SPE member. His main research areas are enhanced oil recovery using chemicals and CO2, formation evaluation, and the reservoir simulation. The half and half gas CO2 injection in tight and shale reservoirs he proposed in 2013 had been widely accepted as the most feasible EOR method in shale oil reservoirs. He has co-authored about 300 papers, invented 12 patents, and published 3 EOR books. He is listed in Stanford University's top 2% of global researchers in the world. Dr. Sheng holds his PhD degree from University of Alberta. He received the U.S. Fulbright Scholar Grant 2021, 2 SPE Regional Technique Awards, and then Southwestern U.S. Region 2013 and 2015, and the Outstanding Associate Editor Awards 2008 for SPE-REE. So please join me, welcome Dr. Sheng's talk. Dr. Sheng, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Zhen. And hello, everyone. I'm James Sheng. So today I'm going to talk about CO2 EOR and related issues. I plan to go through the shale. What we can do about shale and reservoir to enhance oil recovery, and then I specifically talk about the half of half in terms of which agent is better. Then I talk about CO2 minimum miscible pressure, MMP, and then the CO2 rock interactions, and S14 precipitation and deposition during the CO2 injection, and conclusions, and finally acknowledgements. So first, let's look at what the current technology. Current technology for shale and tight reservoirs are, we have to drill horizontal well, and we have to multi-stage fracturing horizontal well. And then we depleted the pressure so that oil can come out. So that is basically the current technology or kind of mature technology. So then let's look at, based on this technology, how much oil we can produce. In the right-hand side table, you can see this is about the 20 US players oil recovery efficiency or oil recovery factor. So you can see most of them is below 5%. So therefore, the EOR price in tight and shale reservoirs is huge, because more than 90% of the oil remains in the reservoir if we're using the current technology. So then next question is, what kind of ER method it could be practical, okay? Before that, let me introduce a little bit simply brief explain what is flooding mode, how we going to produce oil for some people who are not in petroleum area and petroleum discipline. So we inject, for example, CO2 from one well, it's called injection well, and original oil in the reservoir, and then inject the CO2 is going to displace the oil from the injection well and try to move and displace oil to the production wells, okay, production wells, and then produced from production well to the surface. So that is called flooding, which is basically use CO2 to drive oil out. Okay, another method is called a half a puff. What we do is, during the half a puff, let's guess, for example, you CO2, you inject this well, and I mentioned earlier, we have a horizontal fracture well, right? So this is represent one fracture. So then inject CO2 will go through the fracture and then go to the deep reservoir or then contact with the oil in the rock. But then sometimes we stop injection. It's called shortening the well to let the CO2 soak with the soak CO2 so that CO2 is going to have time to contact with the oil and mix with oil. Then later on we reduce the pressure, and then the oil and the CO2 is going to produce to the surface. So that is called a puff process, and this is a half process. Okay. So during this process, we only have one single well, same well. We do half and then puff in the same well. Okay, that is a half puff process. So now let's look at so what I do is first is use a simulation model to first check how much how much oil can produce. So now in this I just use a simple model. Here is the 3D model looks like, and you have two sides. This is a one half fracture. Okay, in the left hand side you have another half fracture, and this is fracture. I'm sorry, this is a kind of horizontal well, and you have two half fracture there, and this model represents one fracture production, one fracture model. So then you assume here you have one well injector. Here is a producer for flooding mode. If is let's look at this top view. Here you have two wells here, one injector and a producer. For a flooding mode, so here's injector, here's producer. But if it is a half a puff, then this both are just basically is during the injection, CO2 is injected from well to the reservoir, and the same side this well. So both well is worked as either half a puff well. So two half wells here. They come together is one well and two half fracture. So total is one well, one fracture model. Right? Now, based on this kind of simple model, let's look at the EOR potential. First, initially is 10-year primary depletion using current technology, using the horizontal wells and with horizontal wells and the fractures. So from this model, oil recovery is about 5.75%, which is in line with what we expected from such kind of reservoir. And let's focus gas injection first in the left column. So then, based on this 10-year primary depletion, and then we go for 20-year gas flooding. In this case, actually, simulation actually use nitrogen. For 20 years gas flooding, we could get an actual 2.39% of oil. Okay, then I changed it to 20 years, half a puff more. So now we get a 16.69%. So you can see this half puff EUR potential is much higher than flooding. Similarly, let's look at water injection. In the beginning, primary depletion 5.75, then 20 years water flooding, then we get a 1.86. The 20-year half a puff water injection is about additional 2.4%. So now you can see for the water injection, these two modes give the oil recovery very similar. All right. So then from this simulation study, let's summarize what we observe. Gas injection is much better than water injection. Let's compare the half a puff here and the flooding here. Flooding is slightly higher, but half a puff is much higher than gas injection, is much higher than the water flooding. Okay, so then analysis is gas half a puff is much better than gas flooding. That's we can get this kind of observation from these two data, right? Okay, so then this is simulation work. Next one is in the beginning. Initially, I did simulation work. Then whether it's realistic or not, or it is possible in physics. In physics, it could be achieved. So first, then I did we did some simulation work, experiment work. So remember, here is a horizontal wheel multi-fracture, right? So then we look at a single fracture. Then we have this fracture. We have CO2. And then here in the label, it is the matrix rock or rock matrix. So what we can do in the laboratory, we can use this is a steel container. We put a core inside, and then the annulus will work as a fracture. The yellow space represents the fracture. Then when we inject the CO2 is initially in the yellow annulus, and then gradually CO2 is going to penetrate into the rock matrix, and then contact with the oil, right? And then we deplete the pressure in the yellow, annulus, and then oil in the rock matrix will gradually come to fracture, and then if you connect to the well, and it's going to be produced in the well. So that is produced from well. That represents what happens in the field. Okay, so we just have very simple experiment set up to do such kind of experiment, half a puff experiment. So here is schematic. We have either nitrogen or CO2 gas tank. Here is the core. Okay. And then initially you inject here you saturate the oil in the core is saturated with oil. Then CO2 will supply CO2 with a high pressure, some time, and then we deplete the pressure, and oil in the rock matrix will come to fracture and then flow out of the matrix. Right. Now let's look at some results. Here is the vertical axis is the oil recovery, and here is a different cycles, cycle 1, cycle 2. So several cycles, we did a several cycles. Here 3 curves are for three cores, so different cores. We tested different cores. Initial half pressure is 4,500, and then we depleted to atmospheric. So for example, this first cycle, initially 4,500. And then we depleted it to atmospheric pressure. So that is the oil recovery we got. Then we go to second cycle, inject CO2 again, and then deplete again. Repeat this cycle. First, we can see that these different curves, here, the Eagle Fall and the Barnett and the Mancos core, so different rocks could provide different oil recovery. That's obvious. Okay, so that's easy to understand. The next way is what is the potential? in the laboratory scale, maximum could be about 70%. Some is 50%, here is 40%. So that is significantly high or in terms of shear and tight reservoir. Okay, so therefore this idea has been proved by the simulation and experiments. So then the question, why half a puff is much better than gas flooding? So by the way, we also did an experiment to prove half a puff is much better than a gas flooding in terms of oil recovery. So now let's look at gas flooding. So gas flooding, the main problem is gas breakthrough issue. Sometimes if you have, generally in a shear and tight reservoir, we have, especially for shear, we have minor fractures. If fractures are connected between the injection wells and the production wells, then if you inject gas is very movable gas compared to the oil, so gas breakthrough issue. Another thing is, if the fractures are not connected, then this injected gas will be very difficult to move from injection wells to production wells because the probability is very low for shear and tight reservoirs. All right. So now let's look at half a puff injection. First, half a puff injection we use only single well. We assume every single well is an isolated injection and production pattern. So then there's no breakthrough issue. Okay. Another thing is, then we quick response. What does it mean? You inject the CO2 and then you stop. If you produce the oil, then the oil will immediately come out. But if you inject, for the gas flooding mode, then inject it will take some time for gas to drive oil from injection wells to production wells. All right. Another thing is for the half a puff, we can recycle the gas, produce the gas. For in terms of fractures, actually provide large contact area for gas to penetrate into matrix. So this fracture becomes an advantage. So now from this several factors we can see it's easy to understand half a puff is better. Now next one is in terms of half a puff, let's see then which agent is better, which gas is better. So we did this experiment work. So here is oil recovery, and here different cycles. Now we can say this is CO2, this is nitrogen, this is methane. CO2, yeah, oil recovery is much higher than other two gases. Here are detailed experiment conditions. I'm not going to elaborate too much. Okay, so then that is experiment data. Now let's look at field data. We use the simulation because the field is cannot simply compare different agents. We did a simulation work, field scale simulation work. Now you can see this is first look at this one similar to what we observed in the laboratory. So CO2 is better than methane and nitrogen. But by the way, we also tried ethane. Ethane actually is much better than other gases. Okay, and so by the way, even some other service company provide using C3 or propane. So that is a good thing for that one is you do not have to use high pressure compressor. Okay, so today talk I will focus on compare the CO2 with other gases. All right, so therefore CO2 does have a higher potential, the high EUR potential. So next one is when you look at this CO2 minimum miscible pressure. First, let me explain what is the minimum miscible pressure. Now it's easy to understand. If the injection pressure is high, it will be easier for CO2 to get into the rock matrix and contact with the oil and mixed with the oil, right? So therefore, it's a mixed oil or miscible with oil. So as the pressure higher, and the oil and the CO2 are become more and more mixed together. So let me use this chart. So in the beginning here is the injection pressure. This is the oil recovery. As in the beginning is low pressure, and then with high pressure. As the pressure increases, oil recovery will be increased because CO2 is better and better mixed with the oil. Okay, but then when the pressure is too high, so then you increase pressure, then oil recovery oil recovery increase will not be as much as it is earlier. So now we have this oil recovery versus pressure. We have this data point, and early stage we have such kind of short, high slope straight line, and then later on we have flat straight line. The intersection is the miscible pressure. Okay, is a miscible pressure. That is the way we determine minimum miscible pressure in the conventional reservoir or in conventional ways. Okay, so here in the right upper hand side, so it is the schematic for experiment. So this is called slim tube. Okay, here are the slim tube. Initially is saturated with the oil and sand pack. So here is sand pack. So then we inject gases, for example, CO2 goes through and then drive this oil out. So that is the way we get this data point. So then go through this process, we get a minimum miscible pressure, right? So now we are talking about half a puff. Then what is the half? Then we want to know with half a puff. Let's see. We don't want to say half a puff. The miscible pressure minimum MMP is same as the MMP we got conventional in a conventional way. Okay. So what we did is we just here is the core, and then is this. Then initially we get a gas CO2 injected in, and then we release the pressure, and then oil will come out. Okay, oil will come out, which is similar to what I described earlier. So then we get an oil recovery factor here, oil versus pressure. Then we also get a similar data points here. Now let's see, we get let's follow the conventional way. Here we have two cores, so two experiments. So then we get this one, and we get an intersection. Now we get a MMP, and we get some kind of pressure, right? Let's compare these two pressure. Left hand side is a conventional slim tube. So we got for the same well, same sand pack, the same sand, we got a 16, 20 psi. Then we did a half a puff experiment using the similar method. We determined here this pressure is 1800 psi. But now this pressure is higher than the pressure on MMP we got from conventional slim tube test. So then why? So let's look at we simulated the experiment. These are the simulation data, which shows this is half model. Here you have another, basically this is the core, we cut a half. So this is here is core, right? Okay, here is the annulus, the red one is annulus. So then we inject the CO2 in the annulus, right? So therefore, all this pressure reading is actually pressure reading in the annulus. So annulus pressure, right? But now, although your pressure in the annulus pressure is high, but in the actual in the core, the CO2 mixed contact with the oil, that pressure is lower than annulus pressure, right? Because that core is very tight. So then here is, for example, 1800, but inside of this core will be lower than this 1800 psi. So then when you talk about a minimum MMP, we talk about what is pressure gas pressure to contact with the oil. So therefore, in this case, so actual contact pressure is lower than the pressure in the annulus. That's why, so in the half a puff in shear and tight rocks, the MMP will be high. You use this method, measure the MMP pressure will be higher than the conventional way. And you will ask why for slim tube, the pressure will in the core and the annulus are very close. Because in the slim tube, we use center pack. The center pack, the permeability is very high. So therefore, the injection pressure to the gas pressure, the difference is very small. So therefore, we can consider that very close. So that's why the two pressures will be different from different methods. Okay. Next one, I'm going to talk about CO2 rock interactions. Now, what we did is, okay, here is core, and then this CO2, this is water, CO2 goes through this water tank, is saturated, so therefore this is the CO2 solution, and then you inject CO2 goes through this rock, right? So what we do, we measure the pressure, okay, we measure pressure, and at a constant rate, and then we can, at a constant injection rate, and measure the injection pressure. So we found then, we found the pressures as pressure is higher and become higher. And then we measure then we use the pressure data and the rate data to calculate the permeability. So in this chart, we got permeability versus the pumping time. So as we pump, we get a permeability is lower. Okay, so somehow why is the permeability becomes lower? Then in this case, when you CO2 water and the CO2 will be actually this rock is mancose, it has some content of carbonate. The CO2 water should react with the carbonate and dissolve the rock, right? The pressure should be higher. So then let's look at some pictures. Let's look at right-hand side, upper right-hand side picture first. In the left picture, this is before we did an injection. This is the outlet, the injection site, so surface. Then you can see it is we cracked the reservoir, we cracked the rock. So here is you have fracture here. And then this is after injection. You can see some rock was dissolved, and then it become this fracture some locally become larger, became bigger, right? So if you cut you open this cut the core. Let's see, this is before and this is after the same location. Then this is like this color is changing. So this become lighter and this is become a little bit lighter. So basically, heavier is kind of more porous. Is more pore space will be larger. But from both picture shows, is locally some part pores became larger or bigger, but permeability still is lower. If the pore become larger, then permeability should be higher, right? But why it's lower? That's because these are local phenomena. So it may be local phenomena. But then although here you have like for some part they have a higher pore, larger pores, but they may not be connected. They were not connected in this case, right? So then we also did a mercury injection after mercury injection to check how much mercury value can be invaded into rock. So this is before this gram per cc pore volume, and this is after it's this is the inlet, the injection site, so it has a more exposure to CO2. So in the inlet site, so this volume, this problem was increased. And this is the outlet. So outlet is higher than this before, but lower than inlet. So that makes sense. So in other words, for the CO2 content of some rock, or some rock has some carbonate minerals, then you're going to dissolve this one. But if some part does not have carbonate, then you have not have such kind of dissolution, then the fracture may not be connected. But if not connected, let's say in some cases, let's say, especially look at this picture here, this become lighter. This compared to this one here is lighter. That means it is original pore space actually became more closed. So then that's the one reason that probability became lower. But this is from our experiment. Some literature report, so CO2 water content would do the flooding experiment, the probability became higher. Okay, that's it depends on the mineral of the contents or other factors. But what I try to say is the CO2 water does affect rock properties. Next one is, I'm going to talk about the CO2 fracture. Probably you heard about that, especially in this years, people are more interested in using CO2 to deflect. Why? Because CO2 is a high energy fluid, high compressibility fluid. So during the fracture, you flood reservoir, and then this high pressurized CO2 will provide energy when during the flow back. So it's easier to bring oil back to the surface, right? So therefore, people try to think about using the CO2 flag instead of water flag, hydraulic flag. Well, another reason is hydraulic, as I mentioned just previous slide, water will react with mineral rocks, right? But CO2 may not. So at least less water, you have a swelling issue. But a CO2 you may not such kind of phenomenon, or may not have swelling effect. So let's first look at some one called a CO2 prepared flag. So what they did is, before they inject water to flood reservoir, they inject CO2 first. So let CO2 contact with rock first to get some kind of rock dissolution, and also avoid the water flag, and then also provide high pressurized energy there. Okay, that's the idea. This test was done in China. I will not go to detailed wear number or field something for confidential issue. So let's look at the injection pressure. Here is the injection pressure, red one. This is a CO2 fracture. This is water fracture. Now, first you can see that, so CO2 fracture, and then rock fracture pressure is lower than water fracture. That is kind of is good, right? So then let's look at the EOR potential. So let's look at EOR potential. In this field, I did a simulation work to match this well model, and then based on this model, I did a sensitivities about I use 3 model. One model is assume high probability is history matched model, fracture density, and probability is from history matched model, and this is the oil recovery within the 1 year. Okay. Then I increased the probability and fracture density by 5 times. Now I get this is the oil recovery, and here the increased percentage will be 30.9%. Then if I increase probability and fracture density by 10 times, then I get oil recovery is more than 50%. So in other words, what is the main mechanism for CO2 flag? So CO2 flag probably is going to create high pressure, high probability or high density, high fracture density rock. Then I did not, so in this model, the CO2 injection 3 hours, where production pressure is 30 MPa. And so one thing I did not present one data I did not present here is about if I do not have this high permeability, high flexure density, so incremental oil recovery is not significant. That is, I do not want to talk about here, and some, especially some operators, do not agree with me. So this kind of debate. So I will not talk about that one. But so today's talk, mainly I want to focus on CO2 rock interaction, the effect on oil recovery. Okay. Next one is I'm going to talk about S14 deposition and precipitation and deposition. Why I want to talk about this now? It is well known CO2, when CO2 contact with the oil, and then the S14 component in the oil will be precipitated and deposited in the reservoir. Then this study, we're going to look at how this phenomenon going to affect oil recovery in half a puff process. Okay, what we did is we first check the permeability, right? So we use the Wolfcamp shale oil, and then after 6 cycles, CO2 half a puff at this pressure and soaking 20 hours. So we got a permeability here. This way is before half a puff. After half a puff, permeability was reduced. So that means this S14 precipitated and deposited in the pore, right? But then to make sure this this result are not from experimental error, so we repeat test using decade, which does not have S14 in it. So then we get a after and before and after probabilities are very similar. Okay. Now next way is we further analyze the pore sizes due to the S14 deposition. In the left-hand figure, you can see this is a volume percentage, and this represented the pore size ridge. So here is a small one, left-hand side to large pores. All right. So you can see here's a blue one is before. So each bar represents, for example, let me use this example, blue bar. This blue bar represents the volume percentage within this about 100 to 200 nanometer so pore. So this is percentage. This is a percentage is about here is 20 about 30% probably. So then you can see before this is blue one before. So before experiment half a puff, red one is after half a puff. We can see now after half a puff, this high one become low now. This small one become higher. So then what it says, after half a puff, then looks like the large pores less and more, some large pores become smaller pores because large pores percentage is lower than is become lower, and a small pore percentages became higher now. That is caused by deposition because it's easier for the CO2 go to the high pore, larger pores, and then contact with oil, then S14 deposited there. Then you produce the oil from large pore and some small pore, oil in the small pores, and contribute to the large pores. Then therefore S14 deposition in large pores are more serious than the small pore. Okay, I cannot say it's more serious. That means you have such kind of change from a large pore to a percentage pore. Remember, it's percentage from large pore to small pore. Okay, so this is a solid curve cumulative. So but then we did the same thing, a similar thing. We compared with this crude oil, and then with the dead oil. Dead oil does not have S14. So now you can see before and after, and percentage of volume are similar, and cumulative are almost overlap each other. Okay, so then next one is we have such kind of S14 deposition issue. How significant it could affect the oil recovery? So we did a simulation work, and then here's the oil recovery and different time. Here we can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cycles, also 6 cycles. And then we assume this is what the S14 deposition, and this green one was out. All right. So now we can say deposition could cause about 3.5% oil recovery decrease. All right. So now if you look at the single, this is we first look at this detailed data. Here is the blue one. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, blue one. Blue one represents CO2 concentration, and this green one represents S14 deposition. You can see this is during the injection half period, so blue CO2 increase, and then this S14 deposition increase. During the production half, during the POF period, CO2 decreases, and some deposited S14 will flow out. So therefore, this content decreases. Okay, it does show that this the increase then decrease the process. Finally, let me conclude some key point or whatever you could take from this presentation. First, the half puff gas injection is the most practical EOR method, especially for shale, very tight reservoir. And CO2 is a very good EOR agent. And the CO2 MMP in the half puff is higher than whatever we measure using the slim tube. And CO2 fracture may lead to high probability, high density microfractures. That could be the mechanism for EOR. And then S14 deposition may occur in CO2 half puff. That's what I plan to present. And thank you very much for your attention. By the way, most work was supported by US funding, and most work, especially experiment, was done by ex-PhD student. And I appreciate the US the Fulbright scholar for me to visit the University of Regina. And I appreciate University of Regina as this program host. And I appreciate Dr. Zheng as a coordinator and spend a lot of time and effort for this program. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, and then Dr. Sheng, and then wonderful, and then presentations, and then summarized, and then many, and then years, and then systematic work, and then in the shale oil EOR, and then projects, and then wonderful work there. So let's open for questions. Audience, if you have questions, you can just raise your hands or type and then on the chart, so I can and then read your questions.
Hi, Dr. Zheng.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just got several questions here right now from our WeChat platform, and I will be the representative of them, of our audience, to ask Professor Sheng on the Zoom platform. And the first question is, our audience just wondering that which simulator was used for our CO2 half and puff simulation, and whether those results will be different if we switch the switch between our simulators. Like if we just use the CMG and we want to switch to the Eclipse from Schlumberger, and will the results be different or something like that?
We use the okay. So we use the CMG gem.
Okay.
But of course, different experiment could be have a different data, but overall, the phenomenon should be same.
Okay.
So result or in terms of conclusion should be same.
Okay. Yeah, and I will translate to them. 盛老师是这么回答的，目前盛老师这个团队所用的是加拿大的 CMG-GEM 的模块进行二氧化碳吞吐的模拟。一般情况下，如果选用了四轮媒介的 Eclipse 的话，我们的结果并会出现一些变化，但是在从结论上的性质或者是整体趋势，并不会产生过大的改变。谢谢。And another questions on our WeChat form is for the CO2 injection, CO2 fracturing, and they want to check how to inject our carbon dioxide into the well, and they want to check the injection pressure for that.
So, okay, how to inject CO2? We just CO2 is in liquid state. So CO2 in generally for pilot test, we always have tank, tank. You have such a truck to bring the liquid CO2.
And how to inject? They just want to check how to inject from the ground to the bottom hole. Is that use a compressor or something like that?
No, that's why I say, okay, I'm sorry. So that's why I say it is liquid. Liquid, you do not need a compressor. That is the advantage. So basically, if you use liquid CO2, you seem like water. So whatever pump, that pump, you pump water, just pump water, CO2.
Okay, yeah. And how about the injection pressure?
So that's why it's okay, I showed here. Looks like injection pressure for CO2 is lower than the water.
Lower than the water?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. I can show here. Let's see. No. See, this is CO2 pressure. This is water pressure, fracture pressure.
Okay, and yeah, thank you so much, and I will translate to them. 盛教授的回答是这样的，我们将会使用液态二氧化碳对地层进行二氧化碳的压裂，液态二氧化碳将会和水一样，相当于是通过泵进行泵注，然后液态二氧化碳的泵注压力是低于后期泵注水的压力的。从刚才的图表上可以看到，大概是在50个到60个兆帕左右。这边有一个二氧化碳的注入压力，大概是在50左右，是在50个兆帕左右。And the third question is still from our WeChat platform is, can CO2 half and puff used for EGR, enhanced gas recovery? If so, could you please provide any progress for that?
But from EGR?
Yes. Enhance the gas recovery.
Oh, EGR.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
that is so this CO. That's why I did not present. Basically, for CO, we use CO2 mainly to produce the gas, produce the coal bed methane. So idea is because CO2 is absorption on the rocks is preferred to the methane or nitrogen gas. So that's the way we use CO2 to produce gas. But whether we're going to inject CO2 to produce a natural gas, I'm not aware of how people did. Of course, you can do it, but as a problem is probably it's not as economic as you will get from oil reservoirs, because you probably CO2 even more expensive than natural gas.
Okay, yeah. 盛老师的回答
for sequestration issue, yeah, you can do that. Yeah, basically you use the CO2 to replace the natural gas.
Okay, and I will translate that into Chinese. And 盛老师说，我们现在的二氧化碳注入在提高这个气藏采收率方面，主要现在是 focus on 的话，专注于我们的煤层气提高采收率，也就是我们的 ECBM 模块。对于这主要是由于它的这个竞争吸附能力要高于甲烷和氮气。然后后期如果说用于 EGR 模块，就是我们提高气藏采收率，CO2 的经济效益的话，可能并没有在油藏中那么的 经济和使用。So some more questions from our WeChat platform, and can we just go on, Dr. Zhang?
Yeah, and then maybe let's answer some questions from the Zoom.
Yeah, and I will wait here right now.
Yeah. So Tianye, you can open your and then camera and then maybe microphone to ask your questions by yourself. Oh, you don't have microphone? Okay, so Tianye's question is, and then will injecting methane or hydrocarbon gas also lead to asphaltene deposition?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
Yeah, and then whether injecting methane or hydrocarbon gas also lead to asphaltene deposition.
Yeah, so if you inject other gases, you also have this issue, but it's not as significant or as severe as the CO2. We did such kind of experiment. Of course, this is kind of well known, but we did an experiment to prove it, to check it. So CO2 problem is say deposition or precipitation deposition is this phenomenon is more serious than other gases.
Yeah, great. And then so the next question is from Wenjie Dong. And then I would like to ask what effects the injected CO2 has on the wettability of the rock. How much of the injected CO2 is stored in the rock or recovered with the oil? So whether the injection CO2 will affect the wettability of the rock.
Affect the capillary?
The wettability.
The wettability? Okay, that's a good question. I intend to present something like that, but in this today presentation because of too many results. So today I present what we have done. Some people did a wettability, so that is very important mechanism. So CO2 does change the wettability of the rock. So a lot of people there.
Yeah, great. So I think, and then sometime maybe we can back to the questions from the WeChat platform.
Yeah, a lot of audience from our WeChat platform, they have so many questions here, and I will just pick some of them to ask Dr. Sheng here. And this one is, the first one is the injection pressure and the soaking pressure the same? If not, so how to control the pressure then?
Okay, first, you see, as the soak process going on, your pressure, so initially pressure, of course, the soaking pressure is same as half pressure. But as the soaking process is going on, then the pressure will be slightly decreased because some CO2 is dissolved in the oil.
好的, thank you, Dr. Sheng, and I will translate that into Chinese. 我们的注入压力和我们的焖井压力在一开始初期的时候是相等的，但是后期由于我们焖井的时候，二氧化碳会逐渐的溶于我们的地层原油中，所以它的压力会有一些轻微幅度的下降。And another question is, do we have any cases for the comparison of half and puff and WAG for the WAG, the water alternated gas injection? So which one have the higher efficiency for the oil recovery?
No, we did not do we did not do such kind of, we have not done such kind of experiment, but we did compare the half puff with the gas flooding. So half puff gas injection much better than gas flooding. So because we did not do such kind of WAG, because WAG itself, you have it's flooding process. The problem is you have water. As I presented in this presentation, when you add water, then this kind of process is not going too well. It's not going to be very good because you have in the shear and tight reservoir. Probably the more problem is injectivity and energy. It is not sweep efficiency. Sweeping efficiency is only you have this kind of breakthrough issue in case you have fracture connect each other. So therefore, we never did such kind of detailed work, but I believe should not be an effective way.
Okay, yeah. And I will translate that into Chinese for them. 盛老师说，目前我们这边还没有进行WAG 和 Half and Puff 这边的对比。目前有的对比已经做了实验对比的是我们的吞吐和我们常规的气区。吞吐的效果是显著好于常规气区的。至于 WAG 这一块的话，盛老师比较考虑的是在我们的页岩气藏或者是致密气藏中，我们的这个应该是波及效率会由于裂缝的沟通而大打折扣。它的这个 injectivity 我们的这个注入能力和能量这一块的话，可能会有所下降。总体来说，简而言之的话，其实就是注水的时候，一旦出现了注水的情况，可能整体的效果并不是非常的理想。好的and this one is for the case study in the United States. Are there any field pilots of our CO2 injection in shale reservoirs, such as Eagle Ford in the United States?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I have one paper just summarized the current pilot tests, and some field like EOG, they have a large scale in a project. They claim is very economic. It's kind of $10 per barrel of oil, incremental oil, something like that. So okay. Some people are interested, send me email. I can send you I have a summary report, review paper.
Okay, yeah, and I will tell them in Chinese. 是的，我们在盛老师说，在美国是有一些已经出现了已经进展了一些先导二氧化碳注入的先导实验。他这边有总结报告，可以在我们的后期一起分享给我们的听众，谢谢。So another question from our WeChat platform is, have we calibrate our miscible option used in simulator with your lab test? So,
yeah, what I present from my group, basically, is all the field simulation must be calibrated with experiment first or calibrated with field data. Otherwise, I keep it simple. Otherwise, you don't want to have a minimum verification. Then how could people trust your data?
Okay, yeah, sure. 盛老师的意思是，他们在盛老师的研究团队中，所有做过的混象区的实验和我们的模拟都是基于我们的都是有数据都是有相关的实验数据支撑，并且是做了现场数据的校正的。And I think so. Dr. Zhen and I will wait here, and so I will give the time to other audience from our Zoom platform or something like that.
Yeah, so in the Zoom, and then there's one, and then ask the publication on the CO2 rock reaction, and then Dr. Sheng, can you go to that slide so they can write the paper and then the paper information regarding the, and then the last part, CO2 rock interaction. Yeah, so and then you can say, and then I think the audience, you should be able to say, and then this paper, and then just published this year. Okay, great. And then any other questions from the Zoom? We don't have questions from the Zoom, and then sometimes you can, and then do we have any more questions from the WeChat?
Yes, they are so excited. Yeah, it's about several questions here. We still have some to ask for Professor Sheng here, and they just focus on this questions is about CO2 injection in our light oil reservoir, do we have, is that suitable to inject our carbon dioxide into our light oil reservoir? If it is, and another question is the asphalting precipitation. Is that a very common phenomena in our engineering, in our site production period?
So, okay, first I have to clarify your question. So this work here is experiment was done for the light oil.
Okay.
So your questions can be suitable for heavy oil, is it, or you light oil?
I think it may be they were not aware of which oil we have used for our presentation today, and
it's called it's Wolfcamp oil. It's in Eagle in the Texas, basically where it's kind of is Wolfcamp oil.
Okay.
It's called Wolfcamp.
Oh, okay, yeah, and it just belongs to light oil.
Yeah, it's light oil.
Okay, and another question is the asphalting precipitation. Is that very common during our site production?
Yeah, asphalting is a kind of well-known phenomenon when you inject CO2. But before, we generally talk about this phenomenon in the conventional reservoir, which have high permeabilities. So in the high permeability reservoirs, that issue may not be severe because the pores are large. But the problem is in the shear and tight reservoir, pore is already small. Then what we did is our objective was to check how significant could you affect the shear oil recovery.
Okay, and I will tell them in Chinese. 盛老师说，盛老师团队做的二氧化碳吞吐是使用的是Wolfcamp 这一块的页岩油藏，但是它确实是属于我们的清油。然后第二个问题是沥青纸的沉淀现象是普遍存在的但是相较于我们的高渗透率的油藏而言，低渗透油藏，尤其是页岩油藏和我们的致密油藏，我们的孔喉由于沥青纸的沉淀导致的孔喉堵塞，然后导致的油藏物性的变差，这一块会显得更加严重一些。And they just want to another question is that they just want to check there's a diagram for the injection CO2 injection and the post CO2 and water injection versus the permeability. There's a permeability change diagram after water injection, CO2 and water injection.
Yeah.
And they just want to check. So if we only inject water, will the permeability just decreased, or the permeability decreased because of we inject CO2 and water?
No, this data is CO2 water. So CO2 the water is saturated with CO2.
Yeah. Do we have any lab test
Yeah.
where we just inject
water? If in other studies, I had a few students working on basically talk about water rock interaction.
Okay.
So water rock interactions, I have part of actually few students graduate. So basically, it is we have a swelling issue, but when water contact rock, this swelling pressure may cause some microfracture. That is also it is also very complex physics. You simply say is you cannot simply say this kind of interaction is going to increase or decrease permeability. So it depends on whether the microfracture is connected or not, similar to this CO2.
OK. 盛老师的回答是这样的，是有相关的实验，但是没有在今天的 presentation 中体现出来。是有一些学生是曾经做过我们的仅仅做过水和我们岩石的反应，而我们产生的微裂缝的这一个状态，并不是一个非常简单浅显的问题，就是说我们 仅仅通过它的 permeability 的渗透率的增加或者下降来去衡量和描述这一块的话，需要更进行深度的一些的机理的研究。So a lot of questions is here is on our WeChat platform, and can we just
We have,
you or
yeah.
we have
maybe and then select a few more because of the time, and then so I know we have about and then 700-800 people in the WeChat. Yeah.
And so here is a question that Dr. Sheng, have you considered our CO2 solubility in water during our simulation models?
Yeah, if you Jim, this CO2 must have a equation of state must consider that.
Okay, yeah. 是这样的，我们的二氧化碳在水中的溶解率是必须在我们的 GEM 模块里面是有专门的方程去考虑二氧化碳在水中的溶解率的，所以我们的数值模拟这一块是一定考虑到相关方面的。And I think it's okay right now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's say and then whether we have any further questions from the Zoom. Yeah. And then any questions? And then I didn't say, Dr. Gu, you have any question?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Zeng.
Yeah.
Dr. Zeng, thank you for your presentation. I just have a very simple question for you.
Thank you.
For heavy oil reservoir, if we conduct half and a puff or CSI, which solvent or which mixed solvent you think is better? C3, C2, C3, CO2.
Yeah, I because before I never did this, but when I came here, I did read because I did read quite a few papers. I intend to write a proposal. I say, of course, many people talk about CO2 is a good solvent. I did not do experiment. I think, in my opinion, it's nitrogen gas or something is even better. Because you see, initially, I think we need such kind of light gas. It's to be easy to diffuse or dissipate it into contact with the oil. That initially, when I discussed with Dr. Zeng, I intend to write such kind of proposal, but because maybe it's not a good idea because in Canadian did a lot of work on CSI, so maybe I choose to write another proposal. But my simple point is I do think I have different opinion, but I never did detailed work.
So some company already did some kind of pilot test. They found ethane C2 actually quite good. What is your comment?
Ethane and CO2 together?
No, just ethane.
Yeah, that's why that's why my presentation also shows that too. You see, I have these results, but that is not for heavy oil. But I'm sure for heavy oil should be similar result. Let me go back to that slide. Yeah, that's why we did this work.
Mm-hmm. Because I see you have ethane.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we did have much better actually. We have one PhD work on this one, and she did even detailed mechanism study, all this detailed economic analysis, all this stuff. C2 is much better.
So overall, do you believe mixed solvent is better, like between hydrocarbon and CO2, or just CO2 or hydrocarbon? What's your comment?
Probably the mixture should be better because it kind of you have synergy, right? The synergy.
Thank you.
Yeah, but that's you mean you talk about in terms of mechanism or only the carbon probably mixture is better, but you also need to think about reality. Using check the two together is a lot of is kind of operation issues.
Okay. Yeah, so just a follow-up question, sorry, Dr. Gu here. But if from economic perspective, and then if we look at this data here, we had about 20 years and then 10%. So basically every year and then 0.5%. And then is that still economic, or do we still need to think about how we can and then make the production rate even higher?
Yeah, you do. This is field model, and this model is close to that's why you can see in the experiment were much higher. But so in economics, I probably not that much, frankly. Yeah. That's why I say, in my opinion, most method work, but in terms of mechanism, but economics may not.
Yeah, that's a challenge here. And then because your oil production rate is quite important as well.
Yeah.
Good. And then we have any audience, and then do you have any audience have any further questions?
Hi, Dr. Sheng. And can I just ask a simple questions for the CO2 water rock interactions? Could you please just share that slide for me, for us? Yeah. Just these slides, and I just forgot. How should we measure the permeability in our microdarcy? Cause in several experiments posted on our publications, they just use our CT scans to calculate the numerical permeability, not the actual permeability. So that's why I just want to check how to measure the permeability during our CO2 water rock interaction. Is that use the pressure differential? Or something?
Yeah, basically we use a pressure differential. That's why the reason. See, we consider that. That's the reason we cut this rock. And then so there's from the inlet to outlet, there's very tight fractures, so that we still able to inject the water can still go through from inlet to outlet easily.
Okay. Yeah,
that's all. Probability, look here, this probability is microdarcy, so relatively still is not narrow darcy anymore.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Dr. Sheng, for that. I'm more familiar with that right now. Yeah, and that's all for my questions today.
Okay, and then I think, let's see whether audience will still have anything hands on or. Yeah, I think that's all the question. And then thank you very much. And then Dr. Sheng for the very comprehensive summarize, and then the lots of great work. And then we get lots of questions from the audience, and then very good discussions. And so let's say Dr. Wilson is not here, so we cannot have him to have closing remark. And then Dr. Paitong, and then you have and then some final words before we close the session. Dr. Paitong, are you here? So maybe Dr. Paitong is busy. And then with that, and then we are going to close today's session. Thank you so much. And then Dr. Sheng, and then for the time, and then to prepare the presentation, and then the great work. And also, and our just a little bit of announcement. Next week, the same time, we have and then presentation from Mr. Eric Likos, and who is the Director of Operation of PTRC. Eric is going to summarize and then our 20 years work on the CO2 sequestration in Saskatchewan, and then by now we reached to 40 million of CO2 sequestration in the underground. So if you have time, please join us next week. So with that, and then we are going to close today's session. And then thank you so much, Dr. Sheng.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Chen, for your coordination, and then thank you for all to come to my presentation. And thank you again. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Sheng.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, so I will end now.